right, nerds, good morning. I have a fun show for you today. I was on Twitter and saw this article on the Atlantic about why Joe Swartz joined and then left the Forward Party. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. We've had a bunch of Forward Party people on the show talking about all the great things and the ambitions. And here's a different perspective from someone who joined and then decided not to be part of it anymore. So welcome to the show, Joe, and hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
I love it. Well, that was a very kind of enthusiastic hello, nerds as well.
Well,
How you
I was
doing?
contemplating. I was contemplating because I know some of the folks who
Yeah, that's
watch your
right.
show will be very pro Forward Party. So I thought, well, maybe I'll open up with like an evil villain, like "Hello, nerds."
Yeah. Both could have worked. Both could have worked. Well, tell us. We're gonna get into your forward party experience, but before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself prior to that. I understand you served in the military, also ran for Congress. Just give us a little bit of the backstory on who you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would like to say that like I have enjoyed an epic life of failing upward. So, I grew up in a little small town in rural Minnesota. So, my hometown was like 750 people or something like that, and the nearest neighbors were 65 and 80. So, very very
Mm-hmm.
rural area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, ended up going to law school, and at the time that was, I went to law school in Minneapolis, and at the time, of course, I thought it was like the biggest city God had ever made. So, but then since then have did my time with the military. Ended up living in the DC area for a number of years, where I got into doing tech sales for a small reseller. So have gotten to travel the world to places a lot of people haven't gone, and I keep adding the weird to my life, the layers of weird. So my husband and I have been married for a few years. He's from the Philippines, and when we decided to start a family, we adopted kids from Colombia. So we have three languages going at our house. At any given moment, it can sound like the Tower of Babel. Um, I did some political stuff with Republicans for a number of years. So I was affiliated, I would say, or considered myself conservative from about the time I was in college, up until things started getting stupid with the Trump and Palin. Or I mean, Palin was sort of the first
Yeah.
nod for me, right? Where I was
Yeah.
like, this is not the party of ideas. What are we doing with her?
Mm-hmm.
But it really didn't metastasize until later, right? And when Trump got in, I was like, okay, you guys have this. I don't want to be part of it anymore. Stayed independent for a number of years, and
Mm-hmm.
then when we moved down here to North Carolina, then I said, well, we're in a deep red district, okay. Maybe we can run an experiment. Maybe we can see with a lot of Republicans looking for places you know other than the GOP.
Yep.
Is there a way that we could transplant former Republicans into the Democratic Party by creating a slightly more, and I don't know if you would call it moderate or conservative wing or whatever, right? It depends on how you look at the political spectrum. But could you create a brand of Democratic candidate in a rural area that basically it's sort of like the Democrats of old, right? People who might have been slightly more socially conservative, but they would have been on board for a lot of the economic agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Could
Mm-hmm.
you create something new for that in the 21st century? And so I did the run for Congress. It was a spectacular failure. I got beaten like a rented mule in the primary by 80 to 20. So it was very clear that our experiment failed. Although it's unclear to me how much of it was a sort of rejection of the campaign versus the coin flip of whose name gets on the ballot first. Kind of a recurring theme was basically nobody knew that there was even an election coming up for Congress, right? They were tracking the Senate campaign because they saw the ads, but in a small sort of, but in like a rural district, a lot of people were just like, I don't know, Congress. Like I didn't realize there was an election coming up. So
Mm-hmm.
um, and so as part of that experience, that was when I ended up getting involved in getting involved with Forward Party 1.0, when it was the PAC, right? And
Mm-hmm.
their focus was not to create an actual party apparatus, but to do endorsements and funding and stuff like that, right? So That was when I, met with Blair and got got to know them a little bit. And Blair and I met, Andrew once, and understood them in that context, right?
Mm-hmm.
After the primary, I was like, well, I guess here's the end of the road, right? I mean, Democrats. There was a lot of party sentiment against me too, solely on the basis of not being sort of, socially liberal enough in many instances. But then I saw the merger, and I was like, okay, this is great. I mean, this is kind of the thing that I've been complaining about, is that the Republican Party has gone off the rails, but it's difficult to be involved with the Democratic Party if you're not like in lockstep nationally with
Mm-hmm.
every single progressive ideal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of having some space, stay in the middle or whatever, but some space where we're saying, hey, look, we don't need to like hit the extreme on every issue. And so that post merger, that was when I ended up getting involved with them there.
So you seem like a perfect profile for someone to be part of the Forward Party. Um, you know, I, I, I know people don't like to use the term moderate or centrist, but I do think the Forward Party can occupy that space. What was it that led you to kind of change your mind about whether you want to be part of it or not? Because it seems like you observed that the Republican Party had gone in a very different direction. I totally agree. As a former Republican, I hear you.
Yeah.
And that the Democratic Party was really pushing some, for me, I think the things that give me the most pause are like, defunding the police or abolishing
Right.
ICE.
Yep.
Those are things where I'm like, I hear where you're going, but there's got to be a more pragmatic approach. So it seems like the Forward Party would be a safe harbor for a lot of folks who are just like, hey, we just want common sense kind of solutions that everybody can get behind. And maybe, not everybody's like, 100% for it, but that's like what compromise is about. Let's
Hmm.
try some new ideas. Let's just solve problems and try a different approach. What did you find when you joined the party and got involved?
Yeah. I mean, so I'll kind of preface with the whatever my criticisms are of the party. My criticism is not. I know some people, for example, have written, "Oh, this is all a graft, and Yang's just trying to do this and that." I don't think that's the case, right? Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think this is intended solely like this is just a platform for self-aggrandizement for Andrew. I don't think of all the people that I've come in contact in the party
Mm-hmm.
that I've done work with, everybody is very sincere.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is has sort of pure intent and everything. So I mean, I think there's a lot of people there with a lot of great. They really want to do something better. So I want to make sure people understand that it's not a criticism of the players, so to speak. And there are some things where I think Ford is very, very close, right? They're very close to being on the mark, but there's just sort of a mark they keep missing, and it's along two lines, right? So one is the issue of philosophy, and one is the issue of organization. Okay, and those were the two where I'm just like, all right, I think maybe this is a waste of time, right?
Hmm.
So I agree with Forward from the philosophy side of things. I agree with Forward on the centrality of of electoral reform. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that really does need to be the central and unifying topic, because if you intend to have a very big tent with the idea of coming together so that we can reform, the political culture in this country, you're essentially building what may be a temporary coalition, because you've got folks that are a little more right or a little more left, and they may end up wanting to work toward different policy goals in the future, but at least for now you can keep those people together in a really great coalition. And so the electoral reform can be a central binding point, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I disagree with is the exclusivity of electoral reform as the platform. Okay, there is, you'll get folks saying, "Oh, well, we have a platform. It's free people and thriving communities and a vibrant democracy." That's not a platform. That's a slogan. It's a catchphrase, right? I mean, what political party doesn't say they are for freedom, right? But that's where the disagreement starts,
Mm.
because Republicans, and I'm going to just paint with a broad brush, very, very simple. So, factor out some of the broad strokes there. On the sort of far right end of the spectrum, you have, look, government can't tell me what to do. That's freedom, freedom of contract, freedom of everything, whatever. And on the
Mm-hmm.
other side, you've got no. Freedom is the ability to live your life and be happy and not have to worry about economic threats or this or that, right? Those are two vastly differing definitions of freedom, and both parties going to try to claim freedom. So just saying we're for, free people doesn't mean anything. It's not a platform. It doesn't tell people your approach to governance or what you want from a policy perspective. I don't think you have to have a super specific prescriptive platform. Yeah, I think it's absolutely correct that you should leave it as broad as possible. But if you're going to be asking people to join a new movement, which is inherently more difficult, more time consuming, it needs more money. I mean, you have to have people committed to write checks and put donations in on a regular basis. Then you have to give them something that's a little bit more focused. So okay, let's, you mentioned people don't like the term centrist, and I can see why they don't. But I guess the way I would phrase it is, hey, we're a party that stands for American consensus opinion. Okay, American consensus opinion is that this is not acceptable, that is not acceptable,
Mm-hmm.
and that this is the range of policies that are acceptable. Therefore, this range is the territory on the ideological spectrum that we occupy, right? So I'll use I've done negotiation training for business as well as
Mm-hmm.
at the special warfare school, and the term that comes from negotiating is the zone of possible agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the zone of possible agreement that our candidates will inhabit? Now, that's not to say that, hey, if a candidate steps out of the zone in any particular issue, that they shouldn't be a part of the party. All right, I'm not saying that, but voters don't do that much research on a regular basis. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's clear from anyone who's ever run for Congress or for any office will tell you that the issue research or the research into candidates is just not very stellar. And voters, they use party platforms as a brand, right? As a signaling mechanism. So hey, yeah, that sounds like me, right? I'm going to read the kind of overall big policy idea platform. Wow, that sounds like me. I like that. I'm gonna look into these guys. I'm gonna consider voting for these guys. And that's from a philosophical standpoint. That's where and why I'm disagreeing. Is look, I want there to be a party in this space. I want there to be a new, strong, centrist, moderate, consensus opinion, whatever word you want to pop in there, option that can compete effectively against the current two parties. And I want them to compete effectively because I want people to win so that they can actually pass voting reform. And that's where I think there's a lot of cart and horse discussion right now. Is there's a number of folks. I don't know if you follow Holden Collada on Twitter or anything like that, but
Mm-hmm.
he's very well. We can't do anything until we change the system. We can't have a platform until we change the system, and that's echoed by a lot of people throughout the party. And my response is, you won't change the system if you don't have a platform. It's every single interview that Andrew or Joel Serby or
Mm-hmm.
Miles Taylor or anybody goes on. This is the question that people ask, and the number one thing you have to do when trying to convince people, when trying to sell an idea, is to answer the question that they are asking. Don't try to change the subject into what you think they should be asking, because they pick up on that very quickly. That's the philosophical point, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
pause and take a breath
Yeah.
if you want to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
follow up on
Let's.
anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So the philosophical point, what I'm hearing is your perception is that there's an overemphasis on the electoral reform and an unwillingness to take a position on uh, top issues that we know voters care about. Um, and I think that I hear you there because I've seen a little bit of the reluctance to be very clear on like, well, this
Mm-hmm,
is this is where we stand on abortion or gun control
mm-hmm,
or immigration.
mm-hmm,
What I'm trying to reconcile is when I remember reading the Washington Post editorial, I actually found that I'll put that on the screen. Like
Hmm.
there was a little bit more of a willingness to say, okay, on guns, most people don't agree that we should take them all away, but also we're, worried about, eliminating all guns. There must be a middle ground. On climate change, we don't want to go all the way left and all the way right. And then they kind of go into there being like, some consensus approach.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, did you find that maybe this party is almost like a startup? Has there been a pivot where there's been like probably voices within the foreign party? I'm not in the inner circle, or I'm not officially part of it, but I would imagine any new organization has a diversity of views. Um, isn't there a path philosophically to get to where you want to go as part of like the convention, or how the party kind of goes through its maturation process? Like maybe it just needs some time to build that consensus within the party before they really publish the platform.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a good point, and I think the Washington Post article is I mean, it's a great summation of where I think of exactly how I think the platform should
Mm-hmm.
be put together, right? The I think abortion is a super great example because we have some like data points, right? We have some
Mm-hmm.
great data points from 2022 where every single time it got put to voters,
Yeah.
it stayed the same, right? They said, no, 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 we're not gonna make it so that there's no exceptions, or the legislature has the power to legislate no exceptions. We want some degree of at least early term access, to this piece of healthcare. But
Mm-hmm.
hey, we also kind of find it morally repugnant that you want to be able to just like at a whim, if you want to, you have the legal right to terminate, days before birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a clear opinion, there's a clear consensus that voters have that has emerged from that.
Mm-hmm.
And a group of us got together in the North Carolina chapter and said, hey, look, we want to try to put together a platform that is like this. So we had a group of us that kind of went rogue before, and we said, hey, look, here's the platform that we came up with. And there were a number of us that got together, and we hashed out opinions. And what we did was we
Mm-hmm.
said, all right, let's look at the top opinions or the top issues that Americans have, um, that they're concerned about. And if we don't have to address something, let's not address it, because we are a startup, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of
Mm-hmm.
the things people do politically that is also damaging is putting an opinion out on every single thing under the sun. So let's find the top things that Americans expect to hear from us on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's understand the consensus opinion. And then that consensus opinion, as you pointed out, is usually in a range, right? And let's
Mm-hmm.
put that range in for our platform. And so that's what we did. We went through, and it's a lot of it's the classic stuff like, guns, abortion, the economy, things like that, right? So it's really more of a vision than it is a specific set of like policy papers or anything. And if we didn't have to talk about it, then we weren't going to. For example, we didn't have a foreign policy plank in there, even though that
Mm-hmm.
was really dear to many of our hearts,
Mm-hmm.
because um, you know it's we were writing this for the state of North Carolina, okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that was as a state platform, we don't really need to address foreign policy because we did want to give the party time to mature, and the idea was to give a branding platform essentially so that a voter could look at the party and say, okay, I get it, these are my people, but then also give candidates the ability to have their individual views on it, right? And some people, like the abortion thing, some people really like the old Roe standard of 26 weeks. Some people say, I don't know, like I feel like that cake's been baked a little bit too long, to get rid of it now. Like we should make the cutoff earlier. Look at Europe. Europe has 12 weeks, 14
Mm-hmm.
weeks, 15 weeks as their standard. So it's a range of opinions that an individual candidate could take. I think the difference is that as we got into this, there was this reluctance to do anything. I said, "Hey, look, we've got this. Our group has this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and put it to a vote." And they said, "No, no, no, no. Hold on. We're gonna get some direction from national, right? Everybody's always waiting for direction from national." And they said, "Well, okay, we got the direction from national." They put a series of working groups together that said, "Hey, guys, these are your things that we need to do. Develop, some sort of
Mm-hmm.
political, platform issue. Develop some sort of constitution." and then we've got to get these things ready to get ballot access. And the
Mm-hmm.
response was, and then we put those things together, and it was like, oh, I don't know, maybe that's all too detailed. Maybe we shouldn't do it. And what I've seen morphing out of that conversation, not only at the state level, but at the I'll call it the Twitterverse, right? From other
Mm-hmm.
states where I'm seeing other state leads and everybody is, no, we don't want to go to any platforms because anything that could possibly alienate anybody who likes electoral reform, we don't want to do. And the response
Mm-hmm.
from me and a lot of other people is, if that's the case, then you are an electoral reform PAC. You are not a political party. A political party fulfills a very different function. And you don't even have to have that platform, by the way, at the national level. If national just said, hey, look, we're going to let states put their platforms, they're all going to be a little bit tweaked, a little bit different. Cool. That's in keeping with a vision. That also
Mm-hmm.
helps voters, which, they elect people at state levels, even for federal offices. It gives them that option. But the response has just been, oh, well, no, we don't really want to do that because we might possibly offend somebody. Well, if that's the case, then what you have effectively said is that there are no ideological barriers. You are not rejecting the extremes, because if you won't define the extremes and say, hey, look, we reject this, then
Mm-hmm.
then you're essentially leaving it open for anybody.
Now, if you take the position that the electoral reform is central, and maybe you say, hey, the trade-off is the more positions on other issues we take, the less support for the electoral reform we might have because we'll offend some more people. There are parties in the country's history that have been more single issue parties, like maybe like the Green Party. They may not have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
positions on Social Security or whatever, but they clearly like are very big on the environment. Could the Forward Party succeed as a largely single issue party, or is your view like, no, that will never work because Americans want to know about positions on like the top five issues, and for many of them, electoral reform is not top of their list. Is that where you're coming at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think electoral reform is important to people. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very much at the top of everybody's mind right now. What I'm saying is more that if you say electoral reform is what matters, and they say, yeah, but what about these other things that matter
Mm-hmm.
to me? Then they're just going, the response is, well, look, just trust us. We have really good people, and we're going to agree, and that's what our
Mm-hmm.
party is about. Which, again, it's a noble intent, right? But I would chalk that, I'd throw that in the utopian category, right? I mean, that's why in contracts you can never say like, oh, we're going to agree later. Like, you define that stuff ahead of time, because everybody always says they're going to agree at the beginning, and when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to actually agreeing, that's not what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, I keep going back to, like, branding and credentialing and signaling, right? you know my the average voter is going to say, yes, I really do love the idea of independent redistricting commissions. Yes, I love the idea of ranked choice voting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love the idea of term limits. Those are all, I mean, they're at all-time highs in terms of issue recognition and
Mm-hmm.
approval. But they're not going to agree to suspend their concern over um, reproductive rights, or their concern over the economy. I mean, like, right now, the economy, there's a ton of anxiety about that, because everybody's like, ugh, we're
Mm-hmm.
riding that line between trying to bring her down soft and hitting a recession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People they're gonna need some response on those main issues. And you don't have to even give a really detailed one, right? I don't need a 10-point plan for Social Security in my state party website. I need the flavor, I need the brand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, I think you're there. That's why I said they're close. I think they're very close. They just have to be willing to commit to something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been sort of it's been the same thing from an organizational perspective in many ways, right? I mean, you've got the philosophical issue, but you've also got the organizational issue. I mean,
Yeah. Let's talk
I
about that. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about organizationally what it was like being a volunteer at the Forward Party.
yeah, I mean, so everybody needs time. I get it. And it's a big effort that they're trying to do. But it's an organization that merged the resources and personnel of three.
Mm-hmm.
They knew it was coming. They took several months on that negotiation, and there's a lot of stuff that just didn't get done because I don't know if they were focused on other stuff. I mean, I'm not, I don't want to tell people that I was like super entrenched at the national level. I'm a guy who was just volunteering at the state level. I literally called and I was like, hey guys, I'm interested in doing this, but I just came off of a campaign. I'm frazzled. I'm just about to go adopt my second kid and live in a foreign country for a month, right? Like I'm,
Mm-hmm.
cool to knock on doors. Like I'll just be a foot soldier, no problem. But the challenge is that when you showed up, there was almost nothing waiting, right?
Mm.
There were volunteer state leads, unclear who was in charge about what, and you'd have these town hall meetings, which in the beginning, fine. I mean, you're a couple weeks, 3 weeks after a merger and a startup, like cool, town halls are probably fine, but you get, 6 weeks, 2 months into this process, and it's like, hey, everybody, let's just show up and let's talk about, why you want to be in the Forward Party and what does the Forward Party mean to you? And the same questions get asked every time. Hey, what's the plan for door knocking? Hey,
Mm-hmm.
how do we do, well, not just door knocking, but what's the plan for getting ballot access? And just your viewers may know this already, but that's the central problem with trying to start a new party in this country is that they're banned from even getting on the ballot. That's why you can't run as an independent in almost any state, because you have to go get signatures to be allowed on the ballot. If I wanted to run as a congressman in this district as an independent, I would have had to go out and get a few thousand signatures just to be allowed on the ballot. That's before I can even campaign, raise money, what have you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, that ballot access is really a key feature and a key function of what a new party is able to do, is it allows, it gets that official recognition so that candidates can actually run with some ease in those elections. Um, it's difficult, it's different in each state. So, you have to have a plan to do that. And it didn't take long to do that research, at least in our state. Our group got together and did the research, and we said, hey, look, here's what we need to do to be able to get on the ballot. And the response was, no, 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 no. We just need to wait. We need to wait. I'm sure National will tell us what we need to do, right? And we had a party
Mm-hmm.
constitution that we put together. Hey, guys, we're going to take this constitution template from the other parties because that works here in North Carolina. Here's what we did when we adapted it to ourselves. And here's how we put together an executive committee, right? So that we can have a functioning system. We can have a committee work system. We can kind of work through this in an orderly way. And we know sort of who has what decision-making power. Didn't want to do it, right? And you would think that National would be like, hey guys, like this is the easy button, right? All we're doing is templating and going, because this is administrative work. The work that needs to be done is getting out, knocking on doors, getting ballot signatures, and then getting in place so that we have candidates that can run in the 24 cycle. And we got, oh, hey guys, just hold off on that constitution because we haven't written our affiliation agreement yet. And oh, well, just don't worry about knocking doors yet because we're making a great big new nation builder app so that you can target all these people and it's going to be the backbone for our new party. And my response is like, hey, look, you should have had an affiliation agreement done before you even started forming state chapters. But 3 months later, 3 months after the merger, that's really unacceptable. If you don't, if you think that we need to have a huge technological footprint to do this, I just vastly disagree, because guess what? In North Carolina, you still got to turn those things in on paper, right? So download a CSV, have all your voter data, and literally just go door to door of registered voters. Hi, we're just asking to get on the ballot. Could you sign for us to be able to get on the ballot and give you another choice, right? Like, I don't need to really target anything deeply for a petition drive like that. I mean, that's the kind of organizational stuff that I think has been really lacking. And so you've got these big ambitions. The briefing we got was, hey guys, we want to get that petition in place by October of 22 so that we can get you certified by March of 23. Well, if you're going to do that, you have to commit to taking action. The last juncture, right? We went through 3 state leads who weren't doing their job. They added 3 more state leads. We had 5 working groups plus a research group, and nobody wanted to shut anything down and recombine it to make it more efficient. And then when those weren't working, then they said, well, okay, that was when they added more state leads, and then they just had an election for an executive committee. But it's not really an executive committee because it's another 11-member committee on top of all the committees, on top of the state leads. And it's just like everybody wants to do anything they can except the easy button, which is, put a constitution in place, elect your officers, do regular committee work. And that's the kind of thing that National should have had been prepared for. They should have had, hey, here's a template constitution, guys. Tweak it how you need, but this is kind of how it should work. Hey, here's when you should have these elections. Here's who will allow to vote in the elections. Hey, here's what we want to start putting together for door knocking. And I understand that there's a lot to that, and you'll get a lot of people saying, oh, but it takes time, it takes time, it takes time. If you keep putting off the easy things, you never get on to the hard things. And that's the problem, is that there's just this real rationalization of, they say grace and tolerance is something that's in the Ford Party a lot. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. Yeah. Be graceful and tolerant. But at a certain point in the cycle of failure, you have to have a good, hard assessment of, hey, are we moving apace? If not, we need to relook at this. Maybe Forward National didn't need to spend all of that time and all those resources endorsing candidates in a national race where they probably really didn't put their finger on the button, right? Or their finger on the scale, right? They should have focused on party building instead of, hey, should we be endorsing people? Instead of, my vast Twitter game, I should be focusing on, hey, state chapter X, what progress have you made this week? Have you taken a vote? Do you have these documents ready, etc.?
So it's been 5 months since the Washington Post editorial announcing the party. I could take the position that, hey, these are very understandable execution challenges that they're having, and organizational decision-making challenges. I mean, to take the startup analogy, we've seen, you see this kind of pattern in other organizations that are started from ground up, especially if they're a merger of different entities. Joe, I'm sure you thought about, like, well, there's a path where I can help kind of nudge, and we'll make a little progress each day or each week, and maybe it's not where I want it to be right now, but I can help get it there since it's still in its formative stages. How did you think about deciding to improve it and harden it from within versus, ultimately, I think you've decided to disassociate or decouple from the Forward Party?
Yeah, I mean, so, and by the way, I don't think that's an unfair criticism. Some people will, might say, well, hey, look, you're just going too fast, man. You're going too fast. Everybody else got to keep up. And if I was talking about these things in the space of a few weeks, I think I might consider that criticism. That was why I gave it, 2-3 months. Mm-hmm. And what I was looking for was basically slow, I was looking for concrete steps. Okay. So what I tried to do, like I said, I came in and all I wanted to be was a door knocker. That was it. I'm going to go knock some doors, take a weekend here, there, do all that. And it became really clear that nobody was organizing anything, right? It was, like I said, basically just, I liken it kind of to, kind of group therapy more than anything. So I said, hey, look, guys, if we are going to get there, if we are going to try to be in the 24 election, which is the goal, that is the stated goal. So if your goal is to be in the 24 election, that means by the end of 23, we have to have candidates prepped, trained on the ballot, because they need at least a year of campaigning. And so if I backplan that, here's what we need to do time-wise. So that I said, look, there are some things that we can tick off that are really easy, okay? And the really easy things are Constitution, elect officers. That is step one, phase one, right? And it's not hard. It's basically just, hey guys, here's the structure of the organization and how we conduct business. That, I put together a group. We did that. National ended up asking us to do it through another working group. We workshopped it through the other working group. We went through. We did our legal analysis and talked with the state of North Carolina Board of Elections about how what the recognition process was. And we got all that put together. So all that's been ready for weeks, months. And what you have is people not wanting to vote on it because they're really afraid that they might become like the other parties, right? And maybe we're not there yet. We're not there yet. It's an emotional response to being worried about committing to something. And that's where nationals should be putting their thumb on the scale. They should be saying, guys, this has to happen, right? So just go ahead and do it, because otherwise we're going to get way behind. You could totally throw out all the philosophical stuff I just said, and that stuff we could argue about that till next year. Okay, we could not pass a platform now, and you could present it to a convention in May, right? And do it through a convention process. That's one option you could do. But you go through and you've got to do literally the cookie cutter things that don't need that much thought, right? And I think that's where I said, okay, I've gone out, I've done the research. I had a great team of people who were very detail oriented like that. There were two of us who, had law degrees that were on the constitutional team and the campaign finance. We were looking at the actual establishment of the party. And it just never got anywhere. You're in January of 23, no petition filed, no constitution in place. I don't know. National just seems to keep saying, well, it's a big thing everyone's doing. So at that point, that to me it's a commitment to mediocrity, and it becomes a waste of everybody's time, because the end result is, okay, maybe if you do get the party recognition, you're at the end of 23 to get recognition. You're way behind in terms of identifying candidates for 24. And at that point, that's a million years in the political system, right? Forward announced, and when they announced, they set that clock, right? And there is a time, in politics or in war, there's a set of circumstances, there's a point in time that you have to exploit. And at that point in time, your effort will bear fruit, will pay off. But if you try to do it at another point in time, it's not going to work. So that's my concern. That was why I basically said, all right, I don't think we're getting anywhere. I was there, I tried, and I just couldn't get any movement, even on the most simple of things.
We should talk about the elephant in the room, which is the leadership of the party. And so Rebecca has a question here saying, how much of the people around Andrew, I guess this national leadership group, who's running things at the Forward Party, and what's your take on why I would have to believe that everybody has positive intent and that everybody wants the Forward Party to be successful. And what you're saying is, hey, I get that we have these philosophical things. We can settle that at the convention. If we work backwards from 24, there are things that we have to do now. These are table stakes items that don't require debate. We just got to get the work done. And it sounds like you were not getting engagement on that, or there wasn't a willingness to take action. Why not?
Yeah, so, and again, I'm going to caveat, there's only a certain amount of the sphere of national that I was involved in, right? So I've talked with Blair Walsingham, right? I know some of the players at national. I'm not a. Oh, there goes the phone buzzing. Hold on, I'll mute that.
There's Andrew. He's got.
Well, that was actually my famous brush for the moment with the article was that Andrew followed me on Twitter. So, yeah, I think that so you've got a cast of characters. So you have at the leadership level, you've got Blair, who I don't remember her exact title anymore, but she's basically doing a lot of the internal direction there. You've got
we've had her on the show a couple weeks ago. I find her extremely sincere and she seems very capable to me. I'm curious. Yeah.
Look. There are zero people that I will accuse of being insincere. All of my criticisms, and Blair's a great person. Okay. When I was working with them as the PAC, and we were talking about endorsement for my campaign, and all endorsements got shut down when they had the merger talks.
Right.
But when I was talking to them, I loved just chatting with Blair, because we both come from, there's a lot of similar background that we share, right? All of my criticism is around efficacy. All of my criticism is because I want the party to succeed and become a strong option. And I think there is a moment in time that we occupy now that is strategically relevant. Okay. Um, so nobody, I'm not casting,
Mm-hmm.
aspersions on anybody's sincerity or intent. I'm casting aspersions on execution and things like that. So, Mike Ongstead is the communications director, and I think the director of branding is Ali Backscheider, right? So Mike comes from, my understanding, right? And I don't know Mike personally. I've never talked to him personally.
Mm-hmm.
Just going on Twitter and, the interwebs and all that is, he's from Republican politics, right? I think he was part of the McMullen campaign at one point during the presidential run. Very, he's got, political experience running, doing communications for campaigns. Joel Serby is the political director. Joel was also tied in with Evan McMullen for that presidential stuff. And Joel was previously, he was, don't know if he was the political director, but he was working with one of the two Republican organizations, the Renew American Movement. That was Miles Taylor, the ex-Trump guy. That was his PAC that folded into this. You've got Will Conway is the national volunteer coordinator. Okay. Will's got a big background in Republican politics, and then he worked at Nation Builder after he ended up, I think, on his last political engagement. Very similar stories from everybody, right? So you've got this mix of Republicans and Democrats. It's not, when they first announced, Democrats were just like, "Oh my God, he's just trying to eat into the Republican or into the Democratic Party." And then, the Republicans are the same thing. "Oh, you're only going to pull from Republicans. You're going to kill us." And I'm like, guys, that's just, if you look at the mix in here, everybody's coming from everywhere. So it's not one side or the other, right? I think the challenge is that, are people being serious, or are they being clear-eyed about what it's going to take to actually get people to vote for you? Are they being clear-eyed about the steps that have to be taken? And one of the things that I sense, right, and I can't, it's anecdotal. It's not, it's not, God, the word just flew from my head. What's the opposite of anecdotal evidence? I'm such an idiot right now.
Direct evidence.
Empirical. Thank you. Empirical. Okay. So it's not empirical. It's just anecdotal. I see anecdotally a lot of the former Republicans coming in, and the idea being like, "Oh, I'm not sure I want to be like the sharp political operator that I was then, because I felt like I really sold my soul, and so we're just really gonna run hard on this grace and tolerance thing," right? I mean, I get the intent. Like, nobody wants to feel bad about the work that they're doing, but we also have to be accountable to ourselves. We have to be accountable if we're going to be able to start something that's this complex. And so that means we do have to actually look at targets that we have to hit. And you know what? We might actually have to tell people what we want them to do. That's another thing that keeps coming up is, well, this is a bottom-up movement. It's not top-down. Okay, well, but what does that mean? I mean, they keep sort of using that argument. And in my military past, right, I worked in special warfare. So not special forces. I'm not like a Green Beret. I was civil affairs. So I'm like the guy that comes in and, like, I don't know, helps you guys fix your water system and maybe gets you to like us a little bit more, kind of thing, right? But we all train at the special warfare school. We're one of the special operations branches. And, I keep hearing people talk about a bottom-up organization. And like, literally, that was the world that I inhabited. And I'm like, that's not actually how it works. Bottom up means the commander still gives you intent, right? At the top, somebody still gives you intent. They still say, "Hey, look," and obviously it's a political party, so there's no commander, but just take the analogy. Somebody gives you intent. Somebody gives you timelines or things that you have to hit, and then you figure out how to get there. Bottom up doesn't mean, hey, everybody at the bottom just tells us exactly what they want to do, and we just kind of help out at the top. That's not organizationally how it works. You still have to have goals. And at the top, they should be focusing on that. Hey, guys, we haven't met these. This is the easy button. Push the easy button.
Yeah, I feel like it's the lack of a clear CEO or, singular leader can be a challenge. And I feel like I empathize with the forward party to some extent, because I suspect they're leery of making it Andrew Yang's party, I mean, I'm sure that was part of the
Sure.
merger discussion,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, that's why
Um,
Christine Todd Whitman is the co-chair, you know?
yeah, yeah. But then you've got like co-CEOs, and that's always that's a tricky kind of format. Um, but yeah, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, my understanding from Blair is that there will be a convention, and that policy issues will be debated and discussed, and the platform will be produced, hopefully this year. Do you see a path where if that happens, and it sort of unblocks more of the tactical work that would come after that, you could kind of come back to the party, or is your decision kind of fixed?
I mean, look, I'll never say no. Okay, and look, in all of this, in all of my assertions, I could be totally, completely wrong. Okay, so in a year, I could be eating my hat, right? You just, you have to be humble enough to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a more likely outcome. I understand that Blair said, the there will be convention. I don't disagree that there will be a convention. People hold conventions all the time. They just held one last year for a kickoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference is, what will that convention look like? If it's just a bunch of fanboys and fangirls descending on Las Vegas, and we're all going to have a good time, and we're going to talk about how we don't like the way the extremes are working in this country. Yeah, I mean, that's a convention, but that's more of like an interest
Pep
convention. That's not a
rally.
political convention. Yeah, pep rally. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I keep using group therapy, or
Mm-hmm.
kumbaya session, but yeah, I mean, if it's a political convention, then that means you've got a number of states with actual voting delegates. You have a structure set in place for that convention, etc. And they may well get there. I don't know. I suspect it's going to be far less organized than that. And as far as a discussion about policy is not a platform. Okay. So what I keep hearing, and I'm going to take this directly from, Mike Ongstad and some Twitter interactions we've had. So this is the director of comms for the party,
Mm-hmm.
saying people don't vote for parties. Therefore, we don't need a platform. Candidates are supposed to have the platforms. As far as I know, unless something has changed, that is the official stance of National.
Mm.
We don't need platforms. Candidates have platforms. People need to be researching their candidates, and that's a good idea and a good intent. But if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. Okay, people don't vote that way. They don't go out and do deep research. I mean, some people do, but even the best of us, it's hard to keep up with all the offices sometimes, right? And so you've got that brand in your head about, hey, who am I looking for right now?
Mm. If they did go with that approach of candidate first, um, presumably, how would they pick the candidates that would there be a primary process? I guess it would be a primary process.
That's driven by state law. So what would end up
Mm.
happening is, let's say that North Carolina gets, they get official recognition, and they get ballot
Mm-hmm.
access in
Mm-hmm.
23. So then there is no requirement under state law that uh, the party itself actually doesn't have any influence in who gets picked. State law says, hey, look, and it's this way in a lot of states, I think probably most of them. You get ballot access, and then somebody changes their registration. And as long as they have been a registered member of this party for X period of time, they get to run in the primary. At that point, it is a primary vote. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have more than one forward party person, there would be a primary vote.
Mm-hmm.
But it's conceivable, especially given the number of uncontested races. I mean, there's tons of uncontested races across the country. A lot of state legislature races, especially. It's conceivable that literally the only person that's the forward party candidate is going to jump on that ballot. If they don't have anybody challenging them in the primary, then they just automatically advance to the
Mm.
to the general election. So the party doesn't actually select the candidates, and it's the same
Mm-hmm.
for the other ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess they would select who they want to bring the air power to in terms of
Yeah.
volunteers and money.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. In general, you're not going to have a ton of resources going to candidates in a lot of these races anyway. I mean, I say that may be one advantage that Ford Party has is if they've got a small number of candidates, it's easier for them to assist those candidates, right? Just in general, in elections, a lot of it's on the candidate individually, and that's one of the main challenges, in our system is that unless you're already really well placed and you've got a pack that's just behind you, right? You're kind of on your own to start your career.
Well, Joe, we've got a few minutes left. I do want to shift gears to our final topic, which is we talked for sure, understandably, a lot about the Forward Party. There are other parties that exist in America. What is your take on how they're holding up these days? What are your other options?
I mean, so for me, I just default to Democrats at this point. It's it's an uncomfortable choice in many instances, but one party literally attempted to seize power by violent force 2 years ago, and even before that, I was still voting for Democrats because I just saw the madness of the worship of God Emperor Trump, right? And it's completely anathema. At that point, I just said, look, Republicans can't be trusted with power at all whatsoever. The party needs to be humbled in a serious way. But people also they've continued to vote for the party because they're concerned about the extremism of Democrats, right? I mean, look, I can't get on a call with a PAC without either having to choose which pronoun I want, make a land acknowledgement that this was stolen land, or whatever. Like, pick your little shibboleth that has to be invoked at this point. And Democrats have shot themselves in the foot. They've hollowed out support among sort of the working class, and it's not just the white working class. I mean, we've seen some pretty big changes in Hispanic voting patterns, things like that. I mean, Black voting patterns are still fairly stable, but it's they've still made some progress on the Republican front with that. So I get it. People don't they don't like what they see from the left, and I share that. I mean, I'm a gay guy with in an interracial marriage with immigrant kids, and I am just like at times like, guys, you're too much for me, right? Like, yes, I would love to see immigration reformed, and it absolutely includes an element of increasing efficiency in the system, but also don't give me that no human is illegal stuff, because somebody crossed the border and they're here illegally, and people use that as shorthand. I mean, why does it have to be turned into some sort of phrase of religiousness almost? At any rate, my point is that I think we're going to continue to see some dysfunction on the Republican side. It's only the beginning, the last couple weeks. I think Democrats are going to keep delivering on a lot of things this year, but I don't think in the long term it's stable. I don't think in the long term where we're at is sustainable. And I think we're going to keep hitting crisis after political crisis if we don't fix something. And I think that fix has to come in the form of a viable third party and some electoral reform that takes control of things like redistricting out of partisan political hands.
You mentioned your take on the Republican Party and the use of violence in the transfer of power. I have to reflect that yesterday was the anniversary of January 6th. But I will also say that I actually happened to chat with some people from North Carolina a couple months ago, like a taxi driver, an Uber driver. And, he to this day, and this was just a few months ago, he was convinced that January 6th was a peaceful event, and that it was just, reported by what, he called the mainstream media and distorted. And it's the fact that I don't think that individual was unique in the Republican Party. I think there are a lot of people in the Republican Party who believe that. Is that your observation as well, or am I kind of over-indexing on a couple of taxi conversations.
No, I mean, and I think I saw some. I want to say I saw some survey data on something like this. Oh no, I'm thinking about the survey data about whether the 20 election was stolen.
Mm.
But 60% of Republican voters believe that that the election was stolen in 2020. Right? I mean, that's why I say the Republicans can't be trusted. I mean, look, I have all kinds of criticisms of Democrats. Right? I think the sort of gender extremism. I think the sort of racial essentialism that we've brought in has just it's hurtful for a multiracial, very diverse democracy to really turn everything into like an essential characteristic, right? Um, but at the base, I can push against that, and I can say, sorry, I'm not going to join you on this crazy train part. But at least we can talk about basic facts like what happened here, what happened here, what happened here, right? With the Republicans, I can't do that in 60% of cases. They literally are inhabiting a different level of reality. Um, I would love, by the way, I would love to see some major media companies reach out to people and start really focusing on a little bit more ideological diversity. Because
Mm-hmm.
if all I see on NPR are crazy things and headlines like napping pushes back against white supremacy and capitalism, like eventually the regular dude just sort of leaves those sources behind. And I still read them because for me, just intellectually, like I have a commitment to I'm going to read stuff that I might really hate, right? But it's important for me to understand it. It's important for me to know what people are saying. Um, the average person doesn't have that, and they basically form this idea of what the mainstream media is, and that mainstream media has, at the very least, a better commitment to fact, right? Even though it still has some very deep biases and some very big flaws in it, but they're so alienated, they're so culturally repelled by it that they're going to go to this other source of media that inhabits an alternate factual universe. And I wish some of the major media companies would pick up on this and be able to work through some of that.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure how this plays out for 24. You've got these two parties that seem to be heavily influenced by the activist wings on each side.
Mhm.
You've got a forward party that has not yet gotten its sea legs. Hopefully it will. And then you've got, well, President Trump has announced his campaign, and he's, as far as I can tell, the front runner.
Mhm.
And then you've got Biden, who I feel is probably time for him to retire. But actually, like in terms of policy positions and being reasonable, he's much better option to me than Trump. What do you think is going to happen in 24 for the
Well,
presidential?
first of all, I'm going to plug my policy preference for putting a constitutional amendment in with a maximum age limit. We already have a minimum age limit in the Constitution to qualify for running for office. We need to have a maximum age limit because we should not be consistently put in this position of choosing between old and older and crazier and crazy and crazier. Now, I'm not saying Biden's crazy. I agree with you. There's a number of policy positions upon which he's very moderate, and
Hmm.
overall I think there's been a lot of good things that he's done, even if I disagree with some of the others. But I shouldn't have to worry about whether the one moderate guy in the room is gonna die in the next 2 years, or if he can mentally keep up with one of the most stressful and demanding jobs in the world, right?
Hmm.
There is no reason we should have octogenarians running this country. um, as far as 24 goes, I mean, it's a million miles away. We still have to figure out the whole DeSantis Trump fight that's going on, if it will proceed anywhere. I am adamant in my position that DeSantis is just a slicker version. Okay. He may not be as erratic or crazy as Trump, but he represents the authoritarian MAGA wing. He fights the culture wars I mean, the guy threatened the Special Olympics with millions of dollars in fines because they had a vaccine requirement for players to attend. So he's not a reasonable, rational Republican. A lot of Republicans are saying, "Oh yeah, he's the guy that's going to pull us back to normalcy." Absolutely not the case. I don't buy that for a minute. I think we'll end up coming into a similar situation in 24. It's going to look very similar to this year, which is everybody plows a ton of money into this election. Nobody really gets any major leverage over the other, and we sit in this bloody, terrible stalemate because nobody actually won that election. Americans triangulated and said, "Hey, look, I'm going to try and like neutralize as much crazy as I can because if I feel like if I give any of these guys any additional power, that we're going to start going off the rails."
All right, Joe, before we let you go, I'm going to take a couple of audience questions. The first one is from Jonathan LeBron. What are your thoughts on the House Speaker elections? I mean, they did pick one. It is McCarthy. I think it was the 15th or 14th vote. But what's your take on that whole? I've seen on Twitter some people say this is a good thing. This is an example of how democracy should work, and it's blocking the government from doing too much to people's freedoms, and secondly, defanging the House Speaker position so it's not as powerful as it was under Pelosi and Boehner. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of the defanging, I don't have enough expertise in terms of to compare that, so I'll just punt on that one. I don't buy for a minute the whole like, oh my God, this is great because it's causing dysfunction and the government can't take our stuff. That's bullcrap, right? Like, look, I get it. Some people live with this idea of this 18th century, like the government shouldn't be involved in any of these things. Well, yeah, okay, up until 1830, they didn't think we should build roads either. I mean, it's just not. Conservatism should not be so enamored with the 18th century minimalism. I think that's where it's lost its way, right? I think conservatives got to have a lot of great points, but this is not one of them. I see it as, and I'm not up to date. I didn't realize that they had elected McCarthy. I mean, I think it's just going to contribute to more dysfunction. It's going to be more internal eating of the Republican Party, and perhaps, since I love to say, GOP delenda est, that, the GOP must be destroyed for those people that don't know that quotation. That contributes to that. So I suppose it's a good thing. I wish the Democrats would have taken advantage of this situation. I would have grabbed the most moderate guy left in the House, and I know there's not a ton of them, but Brian Fitzpatrick was the only dude who joined them on the steps for the January 6th memorial. I would have grabbed that dude and said, "Hey, look, we're going to whip all our votes in the Democratic pool. I want you to find 5 other bros. All I want is some additional privileges. Let's get started." Right. And that, I think, would have spoken to the American people a lot of seriousness from the Democratic Party. I think it would have gone a long way toward upping that credential of trust, which is essentially why I think Democrats have not been more successful against Republicans in the last couple elections. I think there's a deficit of trust, and that could have potentially helped.
Lou wants to know what do you hope to accomplish with the Democratic Party? Because sounds like you're definitely done with the GOP and you're taking a break from the Forward Party. What do you think going forward you can do?
I mean, for me, I'm just essentially going to be a voter. I mean, there's you have to have a registration in the way that politics work in this country in most states, right? You have to be registered one way or the other if you want to vote in a primary. I mean, I'll end up just basically being a voter. I had a really negative reaction from the Democratic Party machine in this area. It's the most progressive of progressives in every turn, and they don't seem to understand that they live in an area that just doesn't think that way, right? Like representatives need to represent their areas. So that means that you have to have some sort of brand that's different than the national brand if you want to succeed. And I think that's one of the challenges with both parties. But today is that any sort of deviation is just inexcusable. So I'm not going to do anything crazy with the Democrats. I'll throw some votes or whatever. That's really just my vote preference at this point, as I think of the 2 choices I have, they're the least destructive.
Well, hopefully things get better, and folks like you have more kind of optimistic options. I understand your frustration, and I share a lot of it. Looking at all of the parties out there, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that the Ford Party can pull it together because we kind of need them to. Because I don't
Hey, I
see
would
the
love to be
others.
wrong in
Yeah,
a year.
yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah,
love to be
yeah.
wrong.
Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll get you back in a year, Joe, and look back on 23 and see what the hell happened to
All
this
right.
country.
All right. Sounds
Appreciate you.
good.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on and giving us so much of your time. I think it was a really thoughtful conversation, and I saw in the chat a lot of people were really engaging and appreciating your transparency. So thank you for coming on and hopefully you have an amazing 23 and I think we both hope you're wrong on the Ford Party. Be good for all of us. But I acknowledge that I also wish I saw a little more traction. I think probably everybody does, but fingers crossed. With that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
All right. Goodbye, nerds.
See you later, buddy.
Say
Bye, Joe.
bye.
All right. That was a cool conversation. I mean, I've had a lot of Ford Party representatives on the show, so I thought it would be good to have a alternate perspective, and appreciate Joe coming on and sharing his experience. Definitely, you can tell this is someone who tried and a little frustrated with kind of local national dynamic and desire for more specifics. I've heard that from others as well, and they're 5 months into it, so let's see how the next 5 months go, and keep our fingers crossed. I think the most interesting thing to me is like who. It would be good to. I mean, it would be amazing to be a fly on the wall on those Ford Party national leadership meetings. Like, what are their priorities? What are their goals for this year? Maybe we'll try and get Andrew back on. I can try reaching out to him. I've done it already, but if you're watching this and you'd like to see Andrew back in the Nerd Zone, feel free to tag him in a tweet and say, hey, can you go back on Nerds for Humanity? Because I know he's a busy guy and he has to figure out where he wants to schedule his time. And we're not the biggest channel on the YouTube. Before we wrap up, one of the reasons why this channel still persists is people who support the channel as members. And it basically does two things. It helps cover some of the costs of running the channel, like hosting fees and software licensing fees and things like that. But it also kind of tells me like, hey, people still value the content. I should keep the channel going, even if we're not getting like millions of views. And so I wanted to take a moment to thank some of our top members. And if you have thought about it, you just click the join link. It starts at $1.99 a month. You can cancel anytime. So not a lot of downside, and you get a little shout out at the end of most of our streams. So let's give it a little thank you to the people who make this content possible. We're gonna start with, I believe, Soldier One, who is a senior vice president, our highest level supporter for the Nerds for Humanity channel. Thank you, Soldier One, and he's in the live stream right now. At the VP level, we have Kristen Slevin and Bike. Thank you, Kristen and Bike. They've been supporters for a long time. Kristen for 3 years. At the hardcore level, we have Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Stat Nerd, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Dana, Jason, Parth, Daniel, and Mickey. And we want to thank StreamYard for helping with our streaming costs. And at the entry level, in order of oldest, longest supporters, we have Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Ira, Elizabeth, Shoni, Dr. Jameson, William, Karen, Zemery, Mai, Brittany, Warren, Wana, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Toby, Jeremy, David, Nicholas, Mike, Aurora, Zig, N. Carter, and Roberto. And in terms of overall, who are our oldest, longest standing, and youngest members, the oldest overall are Lisa, Jean, Kristen, Albert, Brandon, Arez, David. All 3 years supporting the Nerds for Humanity content. I gotta give a gong for that. Hold on a second. We gotta get the gong for that one. Oh man, where's the little gong striker? Mrs. Nerd, quote unquote, reorganized the Nerd home office. I don't know where anything is anymore. Here is. So thank you to our 36-month members, Lisa, Jean, Kristen, Albert, Brandon, Arez, and David. Ooh, that sounds good. Okay. And then who are our youngest nerds who clicked that join link very recently? You got Roberto, N. Carter, ZigPC, and Aurora, all 3 years young. The last thing I'll share with you is that I am working with the volunteer team at ofthepeople.us to make some improvements. We're gearing up for the 2024 cycle. So I wanted to thank the people who support ofthepeople.us, which is kind of like a Yelp for political candidates. And we're going to make a bunch of improvements to the candidate page so that if you're running, you know, it could really show off why people should support you, and you can use it as almost like a virtual website, and it's free, all volunteer. And part of the cost of our, you know, website hosting fees and tech development fees is from our Patreon supporters, and those are in order of support: Eric Sanchez, Elizabeth Owen, Tony Perella, Iggy C, Aaron Sarnat, John Perino, Rob, Timothy Jordan, Jessica Ganoan, Trickle Up, Muhan Jang, Travis Klein, Austin Bagan, Mai Zimmeris, and Dylan Shell. So thank you for being supporters of ofthepeople.us. We've got a new designer that recently joined, and Aaron, and he's doing some really cool stuff. We'll see that show up on the site in the next few months, and then I'm going to do some cleanup and archive some candidates from some of the older campaigns, and then we'll improve our Ask Me Anything capability. So lots going on. Sue makes a very good point. Please share this video. I'm going to give you a preemptive cowbell for liking and sharing. In the spirit of positive thinking, I'm going to thank you in advance for sharing and liking. So thank you for liking and sharing. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a great weekend, and goodbye, nerds.